He began setting about trying to assign me the things that he thought would most make me uncomfortable. That way he was going to get rid of me. And he assigned me to boxing.
I hear broadcasting, I think personalities. I think of people like you. I lived it with you.
I was a semi-preppy, spit and polished kid from University of North Carolina. What in the world was I going to know about boxing? I certainly wasn't urban. Lo and behold, I received an offer to call boxing matches on the most prestigious boxing television network. I now had an affiliation with Tyson on the air. I had been covering his fight, the purest sport, the most honest sport, the sport that tells us the most about who we are, what we can endure, what we can't endure, what we are like when confronted with danger and potential damage at the hands of another human being.
Joining us now on Open Book is Jim Lampley. He's a Hall of Fame sportscaster, and he's now an author. The title of the book is It Happened, A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports Television. But I have to say this from a distance, or I'm a huge fan, I'm a fanboy of yours, because I love your broadcasting, I love your insights, and I learned so much in this book, not only about sports and things that I witnessed as a kid or witness even today, but I learned a lot about you. So you've been the voice behind some of the most unforgettable moments in sports, and you can hear that voice in the book. So before we get into it, tell us about Jim Lampley. Why did you go into this career of yours?
Why write a book? Or why go into sports television? Sports television was sort of my birthright from the beginning. My father died when I was 5 years old. My wife loves to say all of your stories begin with the same set of words. Those words are, my father died when I was 5 years old. I was 6 when my mother sat me down very explicitly and concertedly to watch a sports event on television. It just happened that the sports event she chose for initiating me was Sugar Ray Robinson versus Bobo Olson on Gillette Friday Night Fights for the middleweight championship of the world. And so she kind of guided me and schooled me into becoming a boxing fan. And she pointed out that day, by the way, watch Sugar Ray Robinson carefully. He's my favorite fighter because he dances while he fights. And he did. And that was expressive to me. But I spent the bulk of my childhood either in my great-grandmother's kitchen, or my grandmother's kitchen, I should say, my grandmother's kitchen in Hendersonville, North Carolina, or in my mother's kitchen in Pompano Beach, and then later Miami, Florida, where she had gone to sell life insurance after my father died. And both my grandmother and my mother were nonstop inveterate storytellers, and they endowed me with all of their storytelling. And that was the guiding sort of narrative theme of my childhood. And they competed for my attention by telling me stories. So I can still hear them in my head. I know that I made that point in the book, that they are talking to me all the time, even to this day. And both have been gone for quite some time, but they're not gone from me. They still speak to me every day.
I mean, it's such a beautiful part of the book, but you also talk about belonging. And you also talk about, because some of you, look, when I started my career, I was a blue-collar kid. I got to Wall Street. I was very green. I was somewhat insecure. It took a while for me to gain my confidence. You did everything: college football, Olympics, Wimbledon, the Ryder Cup, boxing. When did the light bulb go off to, like, I belong here? When did you think that?
Well, I began my network television sports career by winning a talent hunt. And my winning the talent hunt was completely counterintuitive and flew in the face of everything that ABC Sports had said they were looking for. The overall narrative is that in attempting to cover the captivity of 11 Israeli athletes at Munich in 1972, and attempting to satisfy the storytelling demands of two reporters, Howard Cosell and Peter Jennings, ABC had learned a great deal that they didn't know before about the capabilities of wireless cameras and microphones. And after Munich was over, they came back to New York, and there was a meeting among the sports division, the news division, and the engineering division. And the question was, now that we know that these signals will jump over concrete walls or that they'll go around metal barriers, what can we do with all that? And the thing that was first decided upon was we could put a reporter on the sideline of a football game. So that became the sideline of college football. That became a 432 candidate talent hunt for the first person to be named as a, quote, college age reporter. That began the process by which virtually every live sports event you now watch, especially in conventional sports like football and basketball and baseball, has an on the field or sideline reporter. All that began with me and a Stanford graduate named Don Tollefson in 1974. And I wound up staying on the sideline of college football for 3 years, bitching and moaning the whole time because I didn't want to be there. I wanted to be moving on in my career. I wanted to be doing Wide World of Sports segments and going to the Olympics and doing the other things that I thought would be my right at ABC Sports. And eventually that's what happened. Eventually I did do all of those things, and I got the opportunities that I craved. And one thing led to another. And ultimately I spent more than 40 years traveling the planet, going to sports events, covering them for various networks, 14 Olympics, ABC, NBC, CBS, Turner, boxing, eventually on HBO, although the first person to assign me to boxing was a new incoming division president at ABC Sports, the successor to Roone Arledge, who wanted to get rid of me and thought that I would be such a stylistic misfit in boxing that he could easily get rid of me by making me embarrassed by putting me on the sport. And also that the audience would see me as Cosell's successor on boxing, and that would also ruin me. But the bottom line is I survived the experience, and ultimately he wrote me a ticket to HBO, the most prestigious television network in the world, and I wound up calling fights on HBO for 31 years. So some of my friends have pushed back against the inclusion of the word lucky in the title, but I say, when you're the one person eventually chosen from a 432 person talent hunt and you don't fit any of the credentials that they said they were looking for, you have to regard yourself as lucky. And I was.
There's a guy by the name of Roone Arledge, and I know you remember Roone Arledge. Okay. He loved you, Jim. He loved you. And you worked along some of these giants, Jim McKay, Howard Cosell. My first memory of Jim McKay was the 72 Munich Olympics, where we had the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Do you remember this?
Oh, well, of course. And, again, that what they learned from engineering during that period of time led to my genesis on the network. But yes, I watched the captivity coverage and everything up until McKay's most poignant moment in a career filled with unforgettable, poignant lines and moments, but they're all gone. They're all dead. Was the single most dramatic thing that Jim ever said on the air. And he delivered it with such matter of fact simplicity that it became iconic. And I deeply, deeply admired him. I admired him both from watching him on television and then from watching him at close range when we worked with each other. I don't think he deeply admired me. I don't think he liked the idea of my genesis at ABC Sports, but I couldn't blame him for that. I was ultimately going to be poaching on his territory.
Well, that's what that's what it's very Shakespearean. This. The younger man coming in, the older guy doesn't want to move. This is why we have the older guys in Shakespeare eating the lunch of the younger people. But
I know this because I was an English literature major in college, not a communications major, though I did ultimately go to graduate school in radio, television, and motion pictures. But yes, I have an English literature background, and the most influential professor I had in college was my Shakespeare professor, a guy named Peter McNamara.
Well, I mean, we both know human nature, which is so evident in your book. Talk about Cosell. So Howard Cosell, to me, reading about him, I feel bad about saying this. I haven't really breathed the words Howard Cosell until Jim Lampley brings him back into my life. And it happened because Cosell was my upbringing. Cosell was Monday Night Football. Cosell was Saturday Fights. Cosell was rocking and rolling with Muhammad Ali, who, if you ever come to my office, Jim, there's a huge painting of Muhammad Ali in my office that I made the champ sign because I used to go to his charity outing out in Arizona. I used to help raise money for Parkinson's research, and I loved the champ. But talking to us about Cosell, this is a Jewish lawyer from New York, awkward guy, incredible accent that is not your accent, by the way, or not a Jim McKay accent. Yet he becomes one of the more famous sportscasters. Tell us a little bit about him.
So Roone Arledge, before he moved to ABC and became president of ABC Sports, and eventually president of ABC Sports and ABC News, before all of that, Roone Arledge's executive position in television was that he was head of children's programming at NBC. And when he was head of children's programming at NBC, Roone would take a limousine into Manhattan from Westchester County on Saturday mornings to go and stand in the studio and supervise the feeds of children's shows. And when he was taking that ride in the limousine on Saturday mornings, he became acquainted with a Little League Baseball radio show that was being conducted on I think a Scarsdale radio station by an attorney named Howard Cosell. And Cosell literally had a Little League Baseball show. In fact, there was a later on executive at HBO, Steve Sheffer, a big time exec at HBO, who was one of the ball players that Cosell covered. And Sheffer would do a great imitation. Little Stevie Sheffer playing for Yeshiva, et cetera, et cetera. But that was where Arledge heard the voice. And when he heard the voice and the unique delivery and the unique cadence of all that, somewhere he stashed in his mind, I can do something with that. Maybe I can do something. That's really interesting that this guy is making it that way. And so when he became president of ABC Sports, he reached out and made Cosell a figure in his sports division so that he could have that voice, that very distinctive delivery and cadence and accent and voice that Cosell had.
I hear the voice. I see my mother's shag rug, Lampley. I see the bell bottoms. I see the walnut paneling of my youth. Carol Brady has called Jim Lampley and asked for the walnut paneling back when I hear Cosell's voice.
I was eventually chosen at ABC to be the cub reporter on his magazine show. And it was a Saturday afternoon magazine show called Sports Beat. The fundamental content of Sports Beat was that every week Howard would do an in-studio interview with Bowie Kuhn, Al Davis, a couple of other guys who were his close compadres in sports. And somebody had to go out and do a feature piece. Somebody had to travel for the show to have legs, as it were. And I was the person who did that. So we had offices very close to each other on the 12th floor. And I would go to the office 2 or 3 days a week and sit and wait and listen for the moment when Cosell would step out of his office to where the secretary sat and say, hired, promoted, paid a 6-figure salary. It's insane. No talent whatsoever. This is a travesty. What is Roone thinking about? That was one version of Cosell's take on Jim Lampley. Then there was another version, which was, the kid down the hall is the only one here who's capable of completing a coherent sentence. None of those other morons, not little Jimmy, our host only shorter, or Frank Gifford, the golden boy, none of those people can actually speak English, but Lampley can. So it depended on what day it was and what I was doing and what he was doing, which of those two versions would be delivered. But I heard them both on a pretty regular basis from down the hall.
It's the best. I mean, I could listen to this all day long because this is, literally, I'm going to set the scene for you. I'm reading sporting news. I'm waiting patiently for Sports Illustrated. I'm getting a bowl of cereal in the morning, Jim, and I'm opening up the back of the Daily News so I can look at Bill Gallo's cartoons. And I'm shoveling in the Apple Jacks, and I'm watching you guys and loving you guys and living vicariously through these great athletes. Let's go to HBO boxing, by the way, which is another thing that my brother and I pestered my father, who was a crane operator. We had to get HBO in the house.
And oh my gosh, HBO on a crane operator's salary. Yeah, that's too bad.
Yeah, but I mean, we were addicted to HBO boxing. So tell us a little bit about HBO boxing and interacting with guys like Ali and Tyson and Foreman and Mayweather.
Well, I was assigned to boxing at ABC Sports by Arledge's successor in the sports division when Arledge became president of news, and eventually a new ownership, Capital Cities Broadcasting, decided it's crazy for somebody to be president of both sports and news. Rune, which one do you choose? Of course, he chose news. They took another guy from the stations division, Dennis Swanson, first person who had, by the way, given Oprah Winfrey a talk show at WLS in Chicago. That was his identity and cachet at the network. But they put him in charge of the sports division, and he arrived at the sports division with one basic predilection, which is, who is Jim Lampley and how do I get rid of him? So he began setting about trying to assign me the things that he thought would most make me uncomfortable. And that way he was going to get rid of me. And he assigned me to boxing right away. A, I would be seen as Cosell's successor. B, I was a kind of, semi-preppy, spit and polished kid from University of North Carolina. What in the world was I going to know about boxing? I certainly wasn't urban like Howard. And nobody understood or realized that my mother had assigned me to watch boxing and that the first event she had ever sat me down to watch was a boxing match. So I began to be schooled by a network executive named Alex Wallow, a Greenwich, Connecticut product who was, like you, in love with boxing. And he began to groom me to be a blow-by-blow announcer. And I think he did a pretty good job of grooming me to be a blow-by-blow announcer, because after a few months of that, and Dennis Swanson was at wit's end because he was not succeeding in getting me to leave the network. And in fact, I was getting some good reviews as the boxing blow-by-blow guy. Then I finally did walk away from my ABC contract. I went to work for CBS owned and operated stations, KCBS TV in Los Angeles. And I had a window within the contract under which I could do boxing for somebody. And lo and behold, HBO came along. So I received an offer to call boxing matches on the most prestigious boxing television network, HBO, as an unexpected consolation prize for basically getting canned at ABC. And my first several fights at ABC were Tyson's first several television network appearances. That was why HBO wanted me. I now had an affiliation with Tyson on the air. I had been covering his fights. They could see that the relationship was positive and good. And so I moved to HBO at that point to call boxing matches in 1988. And of course, early 1990 is when Mike was knocked out by Buster Douglas in Tokyo. And that was the first time when I was really stuck for an answer on the air. What am I going to say about this? The second time was when George Foreman knocked out Michael Moorer to become a 45-year-old heavyweight champion. And that is the moment when I said, it happened. It happened. And that was because Foreman had told me exactly how it was going to happen. And what he did in the ring mimicked everything he had said.
There's so many great, amazing stories in here. 14 Olympics had to be surreal. What's the Olympic memory that still gives you chills?
Well, two, and they're both in the book. The very first Olympic event that I ever attended live was Franz Klammer's downhill in Innsbruck, Austria, in 1976, which I think is probably still the greatest and most charismatic alpine ski race run.
I watched that on a 13-inch Sony Trinitron in my bedroom, and I was supposed to be in bed. I was 12 years old, and my brother and I shared a bedroom. We had a 13-inch Sony Trinitron that I bought with the money from my paper route, and I watched Franz Klammer do that and the call on that.
Well, let's tell your followers that they have to now buy my book to understand the graphic details of how that run looked the way it looked and the decision that Klammer made going into the starting shack as to how he could conceivably win the race. And one of the things I learned that day, which, I still chuckle about to this day, is that you think you're going to watch a ski race on the mountain. You don't. You feel it. You hear it. You respond to all of the atmospherics, but you certainly don't see it other than maybe a moment when somebody goes racing by. And that's, something I learned that day watching Klammer win that downhill. But that was one. And then the other, of course, is the Miracle on Ice. I was not supposed to be at the Miracle on Ice. I had other responsibilities. I was in a tape room editing a story about all of the political and organizational upheavals that had gone on in Lake Placid. And the phone rang, what was called the red phone. The red phone was the Arledge phone. I'd been at ABC 6 years at that point. I had never seen a red phone ring. And the red phone rang, and it was Arledge, and he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him, and he said, "Drop that, leave that with the editor, get over to the arena. I think something unusual is going to go on in this hockey game between the United States and the Soviet Union." Now, millions of Americans think that they watched the hockey game live. They did not. They saw it on tape because it was scheduled for 5 o'clock Eastern time. And it had been scheduled for 5 o'clock Eastern time all along when it was essentially a nameless game. Nobody knew which two teams would be appearing. It was a stepping stone toward the medal round. But eventually it came down to the United States versus the Soviet Union for what amounted to a semifinal because the winner of this game was going to go into the final on Sunday morning. This was Friday evening. And when Arledge and the United States Olympic Committee went to the Hockey Federation to ask that the game be moved from 5 o'clock to 8 o'clock so that the American audience could see it in prime time, the Russians exercised their right to say, no way. Game has been on the schedule for 5 o'clock ever since the beginning of the games. Game is going to be played at 5 o'clock. So I'm in a tape room editing a piece. My associate director and I are working, etc. We've got a little monitor on top of the tape bay where we're watching the hockey game as it takes place. And at the end of the first period, Mark Johnson, who was the hottest goal scorer in the world for 2 weeks, got loose in the Russian goal, or in the Russian end, I should say, and slipped the puck under Vladislav Tretiak's glove to make the score 2-2, tie the game. Unexpected tie at the end of the first period. And at that moment, Viktor Tikhonov, the Russian coach, pulled Tretiak, yanking from goal the greatest goalie in the history of the sport, arguably, who had carried them to every world championship and gold medal for the preceding 10 or 12 years. He yanked Tretiak and put in the backup goalie, Anatoly Mishkin. And the game went on. And the red phone rang, and I picked up the red phone because both the tape editor and the associate director pointed to me like, that's got to be for you. And it was Arledge. And he said, "What are you doing?" And I told him. He said, "Let that wait, put that to rest, go to the hockey arena and get in, because I have a hunch something strange is going to happen in this game tonight, and we need an interview to take us off the air. And the last thing I said to him was, Rune, I don't have the right credential to get into the hockey game. Now, this is only 8 years after Munich. We were still in a situation where if you didn't have the right credential to get into an Olympics event, you weren't going to get in. And the last thing Rune said to me was, you'll get in. Clunk, hung up the phone. And I went over to the hockey arena and I found the high school hockey coach whose job it was to supervise the arena. And I had met him a few days before because my agent was a hockey agent, and he let me in. And I wound up watching the last 2 periods of the game there, and then eventually doing an interview that night to take us off the air with Jim Craig and Mike Ruzioni outside of a restaurant in Lake Placid after the biggest upset in the history of team sports. Never been a bigger upset.
I love rereading it in the book, and Mike Ruzioni, to us Italian Americans out here on Long Island, he was the man. We were wearing his jersey, and I remember having such anxiety watching that. And of course, Al Michaels' famous cadence, "Do you believe in miracles?" So I could do a 2-hour podcast with you because it's just amazing. But unfortunately we have a little time constraint. So I'm down to the 5 words. And so in my podcast, Jim, me and my producers, we pick out 5 words. We want our author to say a sentence about the word just to get their reaction. So if I say the word broadcasting, you say
broad audience. Signals being sent out over electronic waves, and it first began with the transformation of Morse code signals into radio news in the 19-teens, before 1919.
Yeah, it's great. When I hear broadcasting, I think personalities, and I think of people like you. I think about
an electronic process.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's why you're such a great broadcaster.
That was what I taught in Evolution of Storytelling and American Electronic News Media here at the University of North Carolina. I taught for 5 semesters after I came here to Chapel Hill. And whenever you say broadcasting, my mind goes back to day one and what I was teaching to those students. Yeah.
I say the word sport. You say what?
From the beginning of mankind, going back to the days of ancient Egypt and eventually Greece and Rome, there have been organized contests of physical prowess, physical skill, and ultimately they came to be known as sports. I don't know how they became known as sports, but I know that they weren't called that at the beginning, because whatever they were called, it was in Roman or Greek or Phoenician or some other language that preceded the preeminence of English. But in English, it's sports.
How about the word boxing?
The purest sport, the most honest sport, as my great friend Tom Hauser has titled a recent book. The sport that tells us the most about who we are, what we can endure, what we can't endure, what we are like when confronted with danger and potential damage at the hands of another human being. All of that we learn from boxing, and it's my favorite sport.
Legacy.
So I don't think of that in terms of me, other than to say, my father died when I was 5 years old. My mother raised me. My grandmother taught me how to tell stories. I am their legacy. And I attempt through the things that I do to honor all 3 of them for everything they gave to me and taught to me when I was growing up.
Last word. I'm going to give you the last word, sir. Jim Lampley.
One of the luckiest people who has ever lived on this particular planet. A person who, because of the choices of others, not his own choice, was given all the opportunities he would most have dreamed of, up to and including calling boxing matches, up to and including going to 14 Olympics, up to and including that my then 8-year-old daughter was babysat for an entire day at the United States Boxing Writers Association dinner in New York by Muhammad Ali. That Muhammad Ali was my absolutely incomparable lifetime hero. He had been my hero when his name was Cassius Clay. That the very first live prize fight I ever attended was Cassius Clay versus Sonny Liston, February 25, 1964 in Miami Beach. My life reads like a fictional story. Then, I wouldn't blame anybody for buying my book and reading the book and thinking to themselves at some point, oh my gosh, did he make this up? Or is this really true?
It's really true. You know, when Stefan said to me that you wanted to come on my show, I was very flattered. So I consider myself lucky as well. But I lived it with you. So I was so excited to have you come on the show because I know that you have I know you feel blessed, and you should, and God bless you. And you've been a great contributor to our zeitgeist and our culture. But I lived it with you. You made it part of our life stories. And you need to know that, and you need to know that you have very grateful fans out there, Jim.
A few years ago,
and I'm one of them.
A few years ago, I would never have thought that I would say, Anthony Scaramucci, I love you. Okay. But I love you for saying that, and I love you for
I love you back.
Your response to my book.
Yeah, I love you back. I really appreciate you joining us. Hall of Fame sportscaster, now author, Jim Lampley. Title of the book, It Happened: A Uniquely Lucky Life in Sports Television. And let me tell you, we are going to promote this. We have 200,000 followers on our YouTube channel, and I've got over 1 million in other sites. We're going to push this book very hard for you, sir, and we really appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I appreciate it. And, I have really enjoyed this, and we'll look forward to coming back.
What we've seen since October 7th is it could be in academia, it could be at the Venice Film Festival, that Israeli producers are not welcome to show their wares. Hillels on campus, the Jewish institutions, are feeling alienated because they support Jewish identity, and therefore they're not invited into progressive circles.
Real honor to have you on. And so joining us now on Open Book is Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. He is the rabbi of the Park Avenue Synagogue since 2008, and he's a leading voice of American Jewry. He has a best-selling book out, and the book's title is For Such a Time as This, and the subtitle is On Being Jewish Today. But it's a brilliant book. You've got a couple of my friends on the back of this book, Richard Haas, Deborah Messing. I'm Deborah Messing's brother's partner, Brett Messing. He went to law school with me, so I know Deborah forever. And, of course, your cardinal, Rabbi, is my cardinal, okay? And so I know the cardinal forever. What a beautiful book. And so let's do a little cavelling, if you don't mind with a little cavelling, okay? The book is outselling the Bible right now. You know you love that. You know I love that. And you know your mother loves that, Rabbi. So God bless you, okay? Welcome to the show, all right?
It's great to be here, Anthony. Thank you so much for the honor.
Okay, so you grow up in Los Angeles, but you're really now a New Yorker. So let's start with the background and tell us why you came to New York, if you don't mind, and then we'll get into the book.
So born and bred Los Angeles, and I went off to University of Michigan, so a big Wolverine. And from there, a year here and there in Israel as part of growing up, met my wife in Israel, and went off to become a rabbi, to go to rabbinical school. My grandfather, blessed memory, was a rabbi in Glasgow, Scotland. So a last name like Cosgrove, one of your first questions is, what sort of Jewish name is Cosgrove? So that's where my roots are, in the UK. And in a way, I just entered the family business. Right. I have one brother who is in the movie business, another brother who's in YouTube. My parents think that's really interesting. There's nothing interesting in my family about becoming a rabbi. That's what nice Jewish boys grow up to be. And then went and got my doctorate at University of Chicago. I thought I was going to be an academic. And then I went into the applied side in 2008 and became the senior rabbi of Park Avenue Synagogue, where I still serve today.
Well, I mean, this book was incredibly well written, and it's very rich in terms of insight into American Jewry, Jewry in general, and also the complexity of being a Jew today. And I'm going to measure being a Jew today. If you don't mind, you can correct me, but I'm just going to say there's a pre-October 7th, and there's now a post-October 7th. Unfortunately, just like there's an America pre-9/11, sir, and America post-9/11. And I think you write about this very eloquently. And so we are recording this roughly about a week before the anniversary of the October 7th terrorist tragedy, massacre in southern Israel. And you talk about this new reality that the Jewish community has woken up to, and as well as the generational divide. So I want to start there. Talk about pre and post October 7th and the impact that it's had on Jews around the world and the generational impact that it's had.
We are at the 1 year mark, and unfortunately, the hostages are still captive. The war is still ongoing. In fact, the North is boiling over right now. It's a very scary time, and my fervent prayer would be that this book is dated. And unfortunately, the themes of war, of the captives, of anti-Semitism are just as urgent as ever. I think what happened on October 7th was a wake-up call for American Jewry. And the title of the book is For Such a Time as This. It comes from the biblical book of Esther, and it tells a story of a Persian queen who hides her identity in the king's palace in order to rise up the ranks of Persian society. And life was going good until wicked Haman's decree came down, and the fate of the Jews was on the line, and she had to step up as a woman, as a Jew, and as a queen, and save the day. And that's what the Jewish festival of Purim in the spring is all about. I use that as a metaphor to frame what happened to American Jews, because we thought that the condition of American Jewry was going to be different than other chapters of Jewish history, than our European counterparts. We thought that we were blending into the melting pot of American society. And on October 7th, it wasn't just a crime against Israelis. It was a crime against Jews. It was a crime against humanity that was perpetrated that day. And then the American Jewry woke up to this moment in time, a sort of whiplash feeling that maybe things aren't as good as we thought they are, right? Maybe our assimilation into American society isn't quite as smooth, and maybe our chapter is not so different than other chapters of Jewish history. So that awakening post October 7th wasn't just in Israel, but it was felt by American Jews, which is really what this book is all about.
So, it's interesting. I went to Yad Vashem a few years ago, and for those people that are listening, what is Yad Vashem? It's a Holocaust memorial on the outskirts of Jerusalem. I've actually visited it twice in my life, and it's funny that I have different reactions every time I go because it's different times in my life, sir. But the last time I went, of all the things there, all the descriptions of the Holocaust, everything that happened, the most resonating thing for me today was a few words on a mural, and I'd like to get you to react to them. It said on a mural, as you're going through the exhibition, it said the Jews lived in Germany with peace and great prosperity for 500 years. Then Hitler came along, and 60% of the Jews moved out of Germany. But there were 40% of the Jews that felt that they were German. And we're going to talk a little bit about the hyphen, because that's part of your book. Yeah. And so the 40%, unfortunately, many of them were massacred in Germany. And so I want you to react to what I'm saying, because, I love my country. I love American Jewry. I love the Jewish people. I'm a Philo-Semite. I'm an Italian kid from Long Island who directly benefited from a good Jewish mom. Okay, that was my friend Todd's mom. She wouldn't let him leave the house to play unless he did his homework. The Italians in my neighborhood Didn't give a shit about that, Rabbi. I'm just letting you know. So I went over to his house, ate a whole thing of Entenmann's cake, and I did my homework, and turned out, well, I was pretty smart. I had good grades. Ended up going to Tufts and Harvard. I blame that on the Jews, Rabbi, okay? It was a good Jewish upbringing. So you're talking to a philo-Semite, somebody that has great respect for Jewish culture and has a love of American Jewry and Jewry worldwide. But what is it? Because you're closer to it than me. You're part of it. What causes this threat? What causes the hatred? What causes the murder? It's just, to me, it's so senseless, but you have a better answer than me. What is it?
I've lived in 3 major urban areas in the States in my life. In Los Angeles, born and bred. I lived about 10 years in Chicago, and now New York for the last 17 years. So with a few years here and there. So for me, I've always lived very comfortably with my Jewish identity. There might have been a word here or there, a slur maybe, but for the most part, to be a New York Jew is a fairly comfortable existence. So but what happened on October 7th was it wasn't new, it's always existed. Anti-Semitism has been around as long as there have been Jews. And I explain in my chapter on anti-Semitism that ever since Pharaoh began oppressing Jews, said that we fear them, they're a fifth column, they're different, they're other than us, and therefore they must be oppressed. That sort of strain, that virus in the human condition, that something we don't know, we therefore fear. What we fear, we therefore hate. And what we hate, we oppress or perform violence against. And that was in the Bible. That was the Jews with Pharaoh. If you look at the history of Christianity, some very dark chapters of Jews being Christ killers and blood libels and otherwise. And under Nazi ideology, the Jew was whatever the hater of the Jew wanted to make them be, a capitalist, a communist. It didn't matter. But those Jews were deemed as others, and ultimately became 6 million of them victims of Hitler's Holocaust. And so it's a virus. And then now what's happened with Israel has become the symbol of Jewish difference, and it has therefore be prompted all sorts of hatreds, well beyond polite differences of opinion as to where this line or that line or whatever the political debate, which reasonable people can have, mind you. I don't make the claim anywhere in the book or anywhere in my rabbinate that Israel is any different than any other country, which is to say that it has flaws. But I just think that to delegitimize the right of Jews to have a sovereign state, to marginalize expressions of Judaism because by dint of being a Jew, you support Jewish self-determination, you slide into anti-Semitism very easily. What we've seen since October 7th is it could be in academia, it could be at the Venice Film Festival that Israeli producers are not welcome to show their wares. There are a million places, Hillels on campus, the Jewish institutions are feeling alienated because they support Jewish identity, and therefore they're not invited into progressive circles.
So I want to test something on you. I want to get you to react to it. When I think about Judaism, it makes me think of the West, and it makes me think of Western liberalism. And what I try to explain to my friends is that you can trace our values back to the Torah. You can go right to the foundation stone of the temple and all the teachings of the ancient Torah, and you can find the laws, whether it's the Ten Commandments or other moralisms in the Torah. They have been reflected in the Western canon of law through Greece, out to Rome, into the French, and even in the aftermath of the French Revolution, British common law, King John, the Magna Carta, the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence. Every aspect of Western liberalism and the idea of freedom, sir, has come from the ancient text. And so what I find astonishing is that we don't acknowledge that enough as a society. We're there's some kind of disconnect. And so one, why do you think there is that disconnect? Well, do you believe what I'm saying? And if you do, why is there a disconnect? And then the second follow-up question to that is what can we do to make that better? What can we do to resolve that?
Look, I'm a Jew. I'm partisan. I'm a big cheerleader of this thing called Judaism. So I do believe, as an American Jew, that some of our core values can be traced right through the Western tradition, right to the Hebrew Bible, and you listed a few of them, right? The idea that we can distinguish between good and evil, and that there is moral choice that is endowed on us by our Creator. The idea that every human being, black, white, straight, gay, tall, short, is created in the image of God, and therefore to be extended equal and infinite dignity. These are values, and we could go through them through the Ten Commandments and otherwise, that are embedded not just in the Jewish tradition, but in the Western tradition. And it's really a expression of that very first call out to Abraham to go forth to the land, and you shall be a blessing, that we are proud of our Judaism, but it's not an insular Judaism. It's a Judaism to be shared with the world, that we have value added to give to a broad secular humanity or other faith traditions. Your question is, why has that been stifled? What is the fear? And I think
Exactly.
I don't know. I think that the persistence of the Jew through the ages, the Romans, the Greeks, the Babylonians, other kingdoms are no longer, the Jews are still here. I think we are the pebble in the shoe to humanity. To those who like us, we are a miracle or perhaps a curiosity. But to those who hate us, we are the victims, and therefore all that which is Jewish becomes the object of hatred. So, what do you think? I mean, I know I'm the guy being interviewed, but you grew up in with Jews, with non-Jews, and otherwise. I would hear slurs every so often, but where hatred actually comes from
So
of the other.
This will probably get me in trouble on my own podcast, so I'll answer it with envy. And what I'll say to you is, it's not even a religious thing; it's an envy thing. And so, and I'm not trying to be stereotypical, sir. So forgive me if it sounds stereotypical. I'm just going to give an observation from my life. So editorialism, the culture of Judaism, okay, the secular culture. Forget about the Torah for a second. Is family values, and a commitment to education. And it sometimes centers around the mother, or usually around the mother. And the kids are taught to educate themselves, because no person can take their education away. And they're taught about the struggle and the diaspora and the ravages and the cyclicality of anti-Semitism. And so if you're educated and you're equipped, you can move to another country, or you could be portable with your brain. And they've gone on to become very successful. Jews objectively have punched over their weight economically. They have a big impact on a planet of 7 or 8 billion people. There's 14 or 15 million Jews. They obviously have a big impact on what I think is one of the most important cities in the world, New York City. And there's a lot of envy, because people are envious. And so unfortunately, when people get envious, it's one of the worst of the 7 sins. Self-victimization, feeling pity for themselves, and envy. And we know that the weakest leaders in our society will scapegoat others. Weakest leaders are not aspirational, they're divisional, and they will find scapegoats to blame whatever society's problems may be on. And so it's been an easy target for the Babylonians, the Romans, the Germans. You pick the group of people. It's an easy target, and people can adhere to it, And I think it's as simple as that. So I may be wrong about all that, but what I want to ask about, because there's something you write about in the book that's left deep impact on me, which is this notion that there's a hyphen.
Yeah.
You're a Jewish American. You're a British
Italian
Jew.
American.
Italian American. There's a hyphen. And how do you reconcile the hyphen, right? Because there has to be, coming out of the Holocaust, the idea that there could be a country, a Jewish state, that would provide a safe haven for Jews after that type of a senseless, innocent massacre makes sense to me. I'm a supporter. I'm a Zionist. And so how do we, in other words, and also the narrative, if I'm just being brutally honest, okay, the narrative has been falsified. The idea that it's an apartheid state, the idea that it's a unequal treatment of people sort of situation, I don't think that is it at all. Remember what Golda Meir said: if the Arabs put down their arms, there would be peace. If the Israelis put down their arms, there'd be no Israel. Yeah. And so the quote. And so to me, how do we get the message? How do we improve the messaging? And how do we dial down the hatred? Because the contribution that Jews have made to humanity, and if you want to think about tragedy, I think about the 6 million people that died that were playing the piano or the violin or making scientific discovery or medical discovery. I think of all of this wasted intellectual activity, this loss to humanity. So how do we get
Look, first of all,
how do we calm
Anthony,
it down?
You really are a philo-Semite. I wish all Jews love Jews as much as you do.
My producer says that I'm not a Jew, but I'm Jewish. Okay, I'm Jewish. But I said to you before this started, if you believe in freedom, Kennedy got to the wall in Berlin. He stood before the wall and he said, "Ich bin ein Berliner." I can't speak Hebrew, but I think if you believe in freedom, then we're all Jews, because the Jews are the first domino that goes. Okay, and then you don't think that domino is coming for you, but guess what? Once the first domino goes, the dominoes start rolling. And Rabbi, we live in a world now that has 5.7 billion people that are living under authoritarianism. Go look at the world, go look at the map, go look at the democracies, and look at the autocrats. And the autocrats are winning. It's 5.7 billion people living under them versus us. So we have to figure this out, and we have to take back the world and make it freer and fairer.
Amen, amen, amen. Look, you covered a lot. And first of all, my vision of America is a vision that embraces a hyphen, right? You're Italian American. I'm Jewish American. These aren't the same things, but the point is we figure out, just like your childhood friendship, a way to all get along, that we all have a sense of shared destiny, even as we celebrate each other's differences. And I get into that in the beginning of the book, that there was this alternative vision. There was a famous play by a guy named Zangwill who talked about the melting pot, that somehow we all get in the same cauldron together and all of our differences allied into one shared vision of an American, which is not my vision. I actually have a vision. Another public intellectual, Horace Callan, talked about a symphony, right? That we get to celebrate your culture as an Italian American, my culture as a Jewish American, African Americans, all the different hyphens of America. That is actually what America is all about. That we can celebrate our differences and know that, as important as our differences are, as human beings created in the image of God, we have an incredible amount more in common. And then as I get into it in the book, and this gets into your next question, is that there is the issue of how can we be Americans and Zionists at the one and the same time, and that is a question that really played out around 1917, the Balfour Declaration. Louis Brandeis, he was the one who sort of first articulated this vision that one is a better American by supporting Israel and the Jewish state, that these aren't. And that was actually, in its moment, a very controversial decision of someone of Brandeis's stature to make. He was a Supreme Court justice. He was in a position of prominence, the highest Jew in the land, and he came out in favor of Jewish self-determination in what was then Palestine. And the story of American Zionism has really continued henceforth, the creation of the State of Israel, all the way up through today. But the charge of dual loyalty is a pernicious one, right? That somehow you are suspect as an American by dint of supporting self-determination in Israel. And that's something that we see on the left, that sometimes dog whistles that we see on the right, that we hear on the right, that somehow American Jews are less than full Americans because of loyalties to support Jewish self-determination in Israel. And the last thing I'll say is, strong Zionist as I am, and it really pains me. I just want to get this out here that somehow in this season, and I'm not unaware that the elections are coming out, right? Somehow the word Zionist has become a bad word, which for me is an expression of Jewish self-determination, so it's a very painful moment that we're living in right now, where that proposition has somehow become controversial. Even with that being said, no different than I can protest my government here in America as an expression of my patriotism, my love of country, so too as an American Jew, I can express dissent with this or that decision, depending on my politic, with the Israeli government, not out of, or let me frame it in the positive, and I do that out of love of the state of Israel. So I have no expectation that every American Jew walks in lockstep with this or that Israeli government. If 500,000 Israelis can protest on the street every Saturday night out of love of country, American Jews can also have a wide berth as far as expressing their love for Israel.
Beautifully said. So I don't really have a lot to add to that. So I'm at the point in the podcast now, because I don't want to overly take your time, where our producers came up with 5 words. We all read your book, and I'm going to read out the word, and then you're going to respond to it. You ready? I'm going to say the word. You're going to say.
Yeah. I've heard your podcast. I'm ready.
Okay. All right. I say the word identity. You say what?
Say proud. I say Jews need to reclaim their identity as proud Jews. It was great to be a Jew on October 6th. It's awesome to be a Jew today.
Okay. I say Israel. You say what?
I say the culmination and realization of a multi-millennial dream of Jewish self-determination and sovereignty.
Okay. I say October 7th, that day.
Horrific. October 7th was a crime against Israelis, against Jews, and against humanity.
Elliot, I watched that IDF film, and I shared that film with a lot of executives here in New York. That 47 minutes is something that I could never forget for the rest of my life. I just want you to know that I pray for those people. Anti-Semitism. I say the word anti-Semitism. You say what?
I say a slippery slope. What starts out in the academy, what starts out with words, what starts out with marginalization, it never ends there. It can slide seamlessly, imperceptibly, and tragically into acts of violence.
But not making this political. I'm just going to say this: we need political leadership that's healing and unifying, and doesn't like to divide people. Don't respond to that, because I promise you I wouldn't make this political with you. The last word, and I'm going to let you have the last word: Judaism.
Judaism's my past, my present, and my future. It is an accident of history that I was born a Jew, and it is the privilege of my lifetime to live proudly as a Jew and to lead a community to practice a vibrant expression of Jewish living.
I'm going to tell you the word I think of, okay? You want to hear the word I think of? I think of the word love. Okay, and I'll leave it at that. All right, Rabbi, it is great to have you on my show. This is Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. The title of the book is forgive me, let me start that again. It's great to have you on my show, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove. The title of the book, For Such a Time as This, on Being Jewish Today. This is the great rabbi of the Park Avenue Synagogue, Rabbi Cosgrove. Thank you for joining us on Open Book.
Thank you.